It's coming soon to a television set near you. An incredibly advanced video game system. Are you ready for these amazing graphics and vibrant colors? Can you handle the speed and the power? How about the capacity for stereo sound and for 5 players? You decide before September, because it's coming. Turbografx 16, the higher energy video game system. Games sold separately.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Ultimate Turbografx 16 review here on Player One Start. In this video, we're going to talk about the launch of the console in the United States and the launch games. But if this is your first time here, or you haven't seen them yet, there were actually 2 parts that precede this video. In the first part, I talk about the history of NEC and the launch of the PC Engine, which was the Turbografx 16's launch in Japan. And in the second part, I talked about the tech specs and how they redesigned the console for the North American market. So if you haven't seen those yet, you might want to watch that before this video because it sets up the stage for this video. So before we start getting too far into it, I actually wanted to talk about the localization process a little bit more and talk about how the console launched in North America. So let's go ahead and take a look.
You are about to witness the future in video game entertainment. The Turbografx 16 Entertainment Super System.
While NEC was working on the hardware side of things, Hudson was working on the software. Having designed the console, the company had produced a large number of games for it, which they immediately began to localize for the US. Even though Hudson's titles would dominate the early console's launch lineup, they felt it was imperative to sign on more Western publishers. Hudson created development tools for the platform, which were ported from NEC's Japan-only PC-98 format to the Western standard MS-DOS. Hudson's staff threw a 2-day developers conference in Monterey, California that covered everything from the financials of producing games for the system to how to develop for the Turbografx 16 and its upcoming CD add-on, which had already launched in Japan in 1988. According to people who attended the conference, Hudson didn't really generate much interest in publishing titles for the Turbografx, but one thing that they said was definitely accomplished was alienating Electronic Arts, who would eventually go on to be one of the top third-party developers for the Sega Genesis. Apparently, in their meeting, Hudson staffers asked EA's team if it was up to the task of developing great CD-ROM games. According to Grenier, EA took offense to that and walked out of the meeting, basically saying, "How dare you question our ability to make games." In the end, neither Hudson nor NEC was able to convince third-party publishers to work with them in the West prior to the system's launch. As a result, NEC ended up taking on the task of publishing all software as well as producing the hardware in the United States. The delay in introducing the PC Engine to the US wasn't just thanks to the hardware redesign or software localization. There were some doubts from NEC about the viability of the PC Engine in the US market. But if NEC Japan did have cold feet, it was not apparent to NEC in the US. The team was all prepared to launch the system in the United States, and external reactions to the Turbografx 16 were promising as well. According to a team member, the press reaction to it and the retailer reaction, they thought they had a good marketing strategy, thought that the product was good, and that they had a good lineup of games. The Sega Genesis would beat them to market by a couple of weeks, but overall they were excited for August 29th, 1989, when the console would launch in store shelves. So the Turbografx 16 actually had a fair amount of games when it launched in 1989. It actually came out with 4 games at launch, including one pack-in title, which was Keith Courage in Alpha Zones. But by the end of 1989, there were a total of 17 games released on HuCards, or turbo chips, before the system ended the year out. Now, there were also 2 games on CD-ROM, but I'm going to skip over those as we're not really talking about the CD-ROM attachment yet. That's going to be its own series. But instead, we're going to focus on these HuCard games, or again, turbo chip games, as we go through this review. So let's go ahead and take a look at some of the launch and early games. So as you can see, there were a fair amount of games that were released in the early part of its life cycle. So we're not going to be able to get through all of them, or else this video would be incredibly long. But we are going to cover at least half of them, and maybe a little bit over that. But for games that I don't cover in this video, they may make an appearance again as I start going through games by genre, especially if I didn't include them in this video. So that said, let's go ahead and start taking a look at some of the launch titles. Okay, being that this would be most people's first time turning on the Turbografx 16 and being introduced to a title screen like this, I have to say this is pretty amazing. But as they may say, don't judge a game by its title screen. Keith Courage and Alpha Zones is a 1989 fantasy action platform video game that was released by NEC for the Turbografx 16. It was the pack-in game for the North American console. However, this game was also released in Japan on the PC Engine a year prior. It is actually adapted from an anime television series of the same name, translated Spirit Hero Wataru. The game itself starts out as an action platform video game, where the player controls the title character Keith Courage. But it sports two different styles of gameplay depending on whether the player is on the overworld above or the underworld below. Overworld areas consist of simple right-forward travel and platform hopping. While in this area, the player controls Keith Courage in his human form, using a dagger to fend off enemies, which take the form of birds, moles, and even cats that drop from the sky. Upon reaching the end of the overworld level, Keith is transported via rainbow to the underworld. In the underworld, he wears the Nova suit. The underworld levels are also a lot more complex and menacing than the colorful overworld, with aggressive nightmare creatures and a larger landscape to travel, with more of the focus on navigating not only horizontally, but also vertically. And at the end of each underworld level, there is a boss. And after defeating the boss, the whole process starts all over in the next level. Upon release, this game received mixed reviews from gamers and critics alike. Most complained that the game was too easy and could be completed fairly quickly, while others would note further that there wasn't really anything particularly exciting about the game. I personally found the game to be a bit average and a weird pack-in title considering some of the other games that had already been released on the PC Engine that I feel would have made a better pick. But I'm sure this game was picked in particularly because of its similarity to other platformers such as Mario. Thankfully, as this was a pack-in title, there are several copies of this game available, making it among the cheaper of the Turbografx titles to get. Though I would recommend this title for gamers who own a Turbografx 16, as it was everyone's introduction to this console, I'm not going to say I enjoy it more for the gameplay, but more for its status in video game history. There are some that view that fellow launch title, the legendary Axe, should have been the pack-in title, as it was a much better game. This game is a horizontal platform video game for the Turbografx 16, developed by Victor Interactive Software, and as with most titles for North America, it was published by NEC. In this game, the player controls Gauguin, a barbarian, whose girl, Flare, was kidnapped by the cult of Jagu. The player must navigate through 6 platforming levels, armed with a legendary axe named Sting, to defeat Jagu and his minions and rescue Flare. The game features a rechargeable strength meter that determines how much damage is dealt from the axe to enemies. This game received high praise and accolades among video game reviewers, and it received positive preview coverage in anticipation of the Turbografx 16's launch, showcasing the new console's capabilities. It was also highly praised for its detailed graphics and animation, diverse music and gameplay, difficulty level, and its execution. It ended up winning Best Turbografx Game of the Year and Video Game of the Year for all consoles from the inaugural awards from Electronic Gaming Monthly. And although this game continues to receive praise to this day, this is one I am not the biggest fan of. I think the biggest hindrance for me is that this game is brutally difficult. It will definitely present a challenge for the hardcore gamer crowd out there, but it will most likely ward off newcomers, as well as the casual gamer. Alien Crush is a pinball video game originally developed by Compile for the PC Engine, later ported by NEC to the Turbografx 16. This game is the first installment of the Crush pinball series, being later followed by 3 sequels. This game features a science fiction theme reminiscent of the film Alien. Essentially, the player is fighting against aliens with their pinball skills. The playfield of Alien Crush consists of 2 main screens, arranged vertically with a pair of flippers at the bottom of each. Play stops momentarily when the ball shifts from one screen to the next. There are also several hidden bonus rooms. Though these rooms all share the same generic background, the obstacles vary but all involve destroying aliens or several waves of aliens to earn bonus points. At the beginning of the game, the player is given a choice of fast or slow ball speed, and 2 different music tracks. Overall, while this game does give me a sense of nostalgia for the pinball video games that used to be prominent in the early 90s, I didn't really find this one as enjoyable. I think every time that the screen switches between the upper and the lower part of the pinball machine, it starts to get slightly annoying, at least for me, after a while. And with essentially only one table shared across a couple of screens, I don't really find it keeping my interest. However, if you are a fan of this genre and appreciate these games, this will definitely be one for you. The controls are solid, the graphics style seems to be on point, and the music and sound effects blend well into the pinball action. Victory Run, translated from its Japanese title, Victory Run 13,000 Kilometers of Glory, is a racing game that was released for Turbografx 16 and is the last launch title of its lineup. This is one of the first games ever to depict the Paris-Dakar Rally. This game is set up to be a typical racing game, somewhat similar to Outrun from Sega and Pole Position from Atari. However, one of the unique features of this game was the fact that the car's parts degraded as they are used and/or abused. Degraded parts could be replaced, but only if the player has the correct type of spare part. The player can acquire up to 20 spare parts before the first race, but can't get any more once the race starts. And this is where people who are fans of casual arcade racers will not enjoy this game as much, as this game was one of the earliest attempts to add more simulation-style elements to the racing environment. As one reviewer put it, playing your best won't always win you the race. The game constantly forces you to perfect every part of your racing style, with each mistake being extremely costly, and sometimes the cause is almost not known. And while that may cause frustration for some, this also adds a sense of realism to racing games that was not seen during this time. So that is all of the games that launched with the system, and to tell you the truth, the whole launch lineup left me a bit underwhelmed. The only game that I can say was critically acclaimed at launch was the legendary Axe. In fact, it won some Game of the Year award in 1989. But to tell you the truth, I find this game incredibly frustrating. I actually didn't like playing it when I first went through it, and when I had a chance to go back and grind through it, it was a bit more enjoyable, but there are a lot of things in there where it's like this early arcade-style game that has kind of unfair difficulty. It seems like the type of gameplay that was meant to gobble up quarters in the arcades, but when I play it at home, there's not really an incentive for me to keep playing it other than, just maybe pride. But that's something I'm not really willing to go back and play through. The game I like the best out of the original launch lineup was the game Victory Run. And that's because I am a fan of these early raster racing games that came out back in the day. In fact, Pole Position 2 was my favorite game on the Atari 7800, at least one of the launch titles. And that's just a game that I really like going back to play. So Victory Run has that same style, kind of like Outrun-ish, and I found that game the most tolerable out of the launch lineup. But then again, that is just my opinion as an adult trying these games out for the first time. If I were playing these games back in 1989, I think I would have been a bit more kind to these games, although the legendary axe still would have made me rage quit quite a few times. So as I wrap things up for the launch titles for the Turbografx 16, I do have a question for those of you that grew up with this system. What were your experiences with any of these titles? The reason I ask is I have to keep in mind back in 1989, the most readily available alternative would have been the Nintendo Entertainment System. So while the graphics would have blown me away, I'm not quite sure the gameplay would have actually won me over. That said, that is going to wrap things up for this video. In the next part, we're going to continue looking at the early games of the Turbografx 16 and see if things get any better. So stay tuned for that video coming to you real soon. As always, if you like what you see, please click that like button, leave a comment below, let me know what you liked about today's video. I want to thank you all so much for watching, and stay tuned because I have more content coming. I will see you in the next one. If you like this video and you'd like to help out with future projects on this channel, please consider supporting me on Patreon. Also, if you enjoy the content of this channel, please remember to click on this subscribe button. Again, I want to thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time.